Hi, I'm Linda Jennings, and I'm the cello and bass professor at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to spend some time with you in this session talking about bass and cello vibrato. I think when students embark upon developing a vibrato and fine-tuning it, it's a very exciting time. Um, I think for all of us, the sound of our instruments is probably the main motivating factor for all of us to practice and continue playing. And vibrato adds such new dimensions to one's playing, and for students, it's going to really bolster their playing levels probably a couple notches. Vibrato, I think, is also when students really start to fine tune their own musical voices on the instrument. So it's a really wonderful time for students. And we're going to talk about how to develop a vibrato and how to fine tune it in some later stages as well. So just a couple general concepts before we dig into some activities. First, if you are a cellist or bassist, or if you're a teacher and you have an instrument handy, that might be nice to have right by you so you could try some of the activities or exercises we're going to go through. On cello and bass, we use what we call a full arm vibrato. And what that means is that the motion is initiated in the upper arm, travels through the entire arm to the fingertips. So we do not use a wrist vibrato, which upper strings use. We also do not use the finger vibrato, which upper strings sometimes use as well. So for cello and bass vibrato, one of the most essential things is that the motion is based on really balanced and free motions. So the quality of the vibrato, it being really relaxed, free, and fluid, is the most important thing when you're starting to develop a vibrato or want to fine tune it further. So in the exercises and activities we're going to go through, we're going to start with really large motions and then fine tune it down to the smaller motions. It works much better that way than trying to start with smaller motions and then get them bigger. So there's a couple checkpoints that I always like to talk with students about before they start vibrato. The first is that it really helps if students are able to produce a really big resonant sound on the instrument. When you start vibrato, if you have a small sort of timid sound, the first sounds with vibrato may not be as encouraging. So if you have a nice big round sound, that's going to make those first vibrato sounds sound really nice. The second thing is you want to make sure in your playing that the power line or the energy flow from your back through your shoulder to your upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, hand, and fingers is free and unobstructive. It's sort of like a water hose. If there's a kink anywhere, if there's tension anywhere in your arm, it's going to make the motions tense, and then it's going to sort of reduce the quality you get with vibrato. So one thing I have students do um, right from the very beginning, before we ever get to vibrato, just to make sure that that left arm is really relaxed and the energy is flowing well, is something I call wings. And it's a fairly simple motion. So if you have an instrument, you can get that in position. And you could put all four fingers on the D string. In first position would be fine. And what you're going to do with your left arm is you're going to pretend you're like a bird. And you're just going to raise and lower your arm and just sort of experiment what that feels like. At this point, you do not need to press down with the fingers. Okay? As you lower your arm, it's going to get close to your body. You don't want it quite that low. As you raise your elbow, you're going to notice that the energy of the arm goes into the fingertips. And that's what we want. We don't want a really high elbow. That's going to create tension in the shoulder. But you want the elbow to be high enough that you're getting the energy into the fingertips. Okay, so again, you could just sort of experiment with that. A too low elbow that cuts off that energy flow, as well as too high an elbow. The next thing you want to double check is that in your left hand, everything when you play without vibrato is just really relaxed and your fingers should feel very free and like springs. So some ways to sort of get that feeling in your left hand is you can pretend you're playing a board game and you can shake the dice. Okay, that's usually done with a very relaxed hand. You could also pretend that you're shaking a Coke can. that's usually really effective too. One of my cello teachers always talked about rattling the bones in your left hand. And we have, I think, 32 or 34 bones in our hand. We have a lot of them. And you're going to imagine that your hand and muscles are so relaxed that when you shake your hand, you could shake that Coke can or shake the dice, that you can almost hear those bones rattling, that you're just so relaxed. So you're going to check that out in just your regular playing without vibrato. If there's any tension, you're going to try to really release that. Now, one of the big challenges, I think, for both cellists and bassists is the left thumb. And it's a little different issues for either instrument. For cellists, the challenge is that we like to often press up into the fingerboard with our thumb. And that's sort of natural because we have what we call our opposable thumb. And in most everyday activities, it works in opposition to the other fingers. In cello playing, we don't want it to do that. Ideally, what we really want is that the arm weight is going to bring the string down to the fingerboard. So you're not just pressing with your finger strength and pushing up with the thumb. So you can check that out in your own playing and see if you're pressing up with the thumb at all. I think cellists go through this probably at some point in their playing. I know in high school I had to work to get rid of that, and that took actually a couple months to get rid of that. So for cellists, the way to get rid of that is maybe 2 steps. First is you're going to think that your hand and arm are like a coat hanger. And you're going to think that your fingers are like the hooks of a coat hanger. So they're going to be strong and springy like springs, but not tight, but strong enough that you're not going to fall off the fingerboard. And you're going to hook those fingers. You could just do this in first position, all 4 fingers. And you're going to hook your arm on the fingerboard. Okay? And if you feel like your end pin's about to fly up, then you're doing it correctly. And with this, your thumb should not be pressing up. Okay? Now, that sometimes brings your elbow a little low, so then you could let your elbow float. And that will get that feeling of getting the energy back into the fingertips. Then, once you start getting that feeling of hanging from the fingerboard, probably the best way to fix thumbs that press up is actually to take the thumb off. You don't want it to fly around. You want it to hover where it normally goes opposite your middle finger. And you could play that way for a while. It might take a month or a couple months to sort of change that habit, depending on how long you've been playing. But if you're pushing up a lot with your thumb, that's going to create a lot of tension, and that's going to make the vibrato motion much harder to do. Now for bassists, the challenge is a little different, especially if you've had bassists who have played guitar electric bass. What you often see is the thumb coming over on the right side of the fingerboard. And the reason probably that you might do that is that it really makes that fingerboard feel secure. So you don't want the instrument to fall or to move around. It gives you a feeling of security, but it's going to make intonation really challenging, and it's going to make vibrato really hard. So for bassists, you really want to make sure that your thumb is really in the middle of the fingerboard. And again, it's going to be opposite, usually your middle finger. Some bassists do opposite your first finger. Okay, so I would address that before you really get into vibrato. Once those are addressed and your hand is relaxed, your arm is relaxed, it's going to make it so much easier to start the vibrato motion and refine it further. The last checkpoint that I work with students on is to make sure that this set of bass knuckles, so the knuckles where your fingers end and your hand begins, that set of knuckles forms a straight line, and that should be almost parallel to the fingerboard. If it's sort of like this, that's going to be a problem, or if it's like this. Okay, when we vibrato, the hand is going to move in the line of that base set of knuckles. So you want that to be almost parallel to the neck. All right, so now we're going to talk about a couple sort of tips about how to place the hand, and then we'll get into some exercises to develop vibrato itself. So the first thing for cello and bass, I find with most students, starting on the middle finger, the second finger, is the most comfortable. Some students might like third finger on the cello, but usually first finger and fourth finger are much less comfortable than the two inner fingers. So I would suggest starting on the second finger. If you find a student, like a cellist, feels more comfortable on the third, you could do that as well. Um, and then you're going to want to start not right in first position, but maybe sort of about here in the fingerboard. The reason for that is when we're up in first position, it's not quite as comfortable as more in the middle of the fingerboard. So for cellists, you might want to start around second or third position, and the same for basses. You might want to start around third or second position. The next thing is that when we vibrato, we tend to play more on the pad of the finger, so on the pad, rather than on the tip of the finger. When we play fast things, we play more on the tops of our fingers. That balances our hand out. But when we go to vibrato, we're actually going to go more to the pad of the finger. And let me demonstrate the difference in sound. So this is more sort of fast technique on the top of my finger, on the tippy top of my finger. It sounds like this. And you could definitely get a vibrato there, but it's sort of limited to that. So if I go more to the pad of the finger, it's going to sound more like this. So you can get different tone colors with that. So what that means is that when we're doing fast technique, the fingers are curved quite a bit. When we go to the vibrato, the fingers are going to still stay curved, but they're going to elongate. So instead of being curved so much this way, the palm of the hand comes away from the instrument just a little bit, and the fingers elongate it. The third tip is that when we vibrato, we generally want to have a more compact hand. We don't want fingers sort of sticking out. That creates a lot of tension and it's going to inhibit the motion. So you want to sort of focus all the fingers around whatever finger you're vibratoing on. So if we're on second finger, we don't want that. You can still get a good vibrato, but it's going to be more tense, okay? And that's the same thing for the thumb. The thumb is going to sort of hover under whatever fingers you're on. And especially for cello, the thumb may actually come off. It may not touch the neck. So my thumb is really not even touching the neck, it's just sort of hovering close to the finger that I'm vibratoing on. So let's get to some steps for developing vibrato. So I think in vibrato, there's two things that you're combining, and it's the combining that makes it challenging. So the first thing is how we connect with the fingerboard. So making sure that you're not pushing up with your thumb for cellist, bassist, making sure that your thumb is not over on the side, making sure that everything is relaxed is going to really help how we actually connect with the fingerboard. And then the second component of it is the vibrato motion itself. So again, we're going to go from large motions, refine it to smaller motions. And the quality of that motion is the most important thing. If it's relaxed, that's what we're aiming for. Um, Faster is not better when we get to vibrato. And I think this is challenging for students. When you see vibrato and you hear it and you want to do it, what you see is that the vibrato motion is actually fairly fast. Um, but you have to be so relaxed when you do it. Otherwise, you could get a really fast, sort of tense vibrato, and we don't want that. So one of the first things I do is a game called the robot game. And this is actually fairly new to me. I had a student that was having a hard time connecting with the motion that starts in the upper arm. And this is a great way to connect that motion to the rest of the arm and the fingers. So with this, you're going to bring your elbows up, and then with your forearms, you're going to sort of like a robot motion would be, and you're going to stay as relaxed as you can be. You're going to support your elbows and your shoulders with your lower back. And then you're going to stay as relaxed as you can and do this motion. And so this sort of helps connect and simulate the motion that you want in the upper arm. And I found for students who get really focused on the motion in the hand and it's not connecting to the rest of the arm, this can be really, really helpful. So that's a nice game to have. We also talked about wings, so I also introduced that. So again, we'll go through that, put all 4 fingers in first position on the D string, and then you're going to experiment with lowering and raising the elbow. And I find for some students, if their elbow's too low, that really disconnects them again to the motion that should be initiated in the upper arm. And so by raising that elbow and feeling that energy going into the fingers, that sometimes is really helpful for students as well. Then I talk about shaking the Coke can. So again, you can all do this with me. Everybody knows how to shake a Coke can. This is really the general motion of vibrato. So it's just going to be as relaxed and as free as it possibly can be. Eventually, you're going to have students shake the Coke can in the direction of the fingerboard, because that's eventually what you're going to be doing. I do another ring game for bass students where they roll that forearm. And this is probably, you could do both shaking the Coke can and this for basses, but this is really helpful. Then I take students to polishing the strings. So on this, you could put all 4 fingers on the D string. Don't press down at this point. And you're going to put it on the pads of your finger, and you're going to pretend that you're just polishing the string with the pads of your fingers, and you're just going to be as relaxed as you can be. Don't go any farther than up to the body of the cello or the bass. Basses, you might want to hold the instrument with your other hand to make sure it's secure. And eventually, you're going to start adding more and more weight to that second finger until there's so much weight that just sort of suction cups on the fingerboard. And the challenge with this is that you keep that shaking of the Coke can or that rolling of the wing. You keep that motion going, okay? And so you just keep sort of coming back to this time and time again. And then at this point, your vibrato may sound like this. And that's great, okay? So the beginning stages of vibrato, it may sound a little slow and a little wah-wah-y, but that's actually what you want. You can fine-tune it to a faster speed once this is all established. But if you start with too fast a vibrato, and it's too narrow, it's much harder to take that back to a slower, wider vibrato. So again, just polishing the strings with your fingertips, eventually adding weight until your finger suction cups on the fingerboard, keeping that motion going. And at this point, it will be sort of a large, wide motion, and it will sound about like that. Another thing I found helpful for students is something I call the living fingerboard. And for this, you're going to pretend that your right arm is your fingerboard, and basically you can go through the same process. What's nice about this is that your skin has some give, whereas the fingerboard of the instrument does not. So there's a little more flexibility for your fingers. And you could, with your arm, you could feel what it feels like to put weight down with your hand. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to polish your arm or your living fingerboard, eventually adding weight to that second finger until it suction cups. And this is a little easier to do on your arm than on the fingerboard itself because there's no give there. Okay, so you could do that as well. Now, teachers, I find that having teachers guide the vibrato for students can be really, really effective. Because again, what you want them to get is the keen aesthetic sense or how it feels in the arm and the hand. So one thing I do is I'll have the student put their arm first on my forearm while I'm vibratoing. You could do this on the cello, you could do it on the living fingerboard. And then I'll place their hand on my hand, on top of my hand, so they could see how relaxed that feels. Okay, and I sometimes have them put their fingers also on my thumb so they could also realize how relaxed that thumb is. Okay, so that's often very effective. I also find too that you could actually put your hand on the student's hand while they're beginning their vibrato. So if they're vibratoing this way, and I would do this from their left hand side, but my arm doesn't go over that way, so I'm going to do it from the right side today, is you could just put your hand on top of them and help them get that vibrato motion. You could sort of actually put your fingers sort of between theirs almost. Okay, and that often is very effective. It sort of helps them realize what it should feel like. Now, another fun game for developing that motion, probably some teachers know about this, is to take a box of Tic Tacs. My cello teacher always took a box of matches and put rice in it because she thought the sound was so much nicer than Tic Tacs, which is probably true. And you're going to take a rubber band, and I could not find rubber band today, so I'm using these tie things. We'll see how long those last. And then you rubber band it to the top of their hand. And for some students, this is really effective, and it helps them hear when their vibrato is working. So if the vibrato is working well, you're going to hear a little rhythm section. You can do it on any finger. This is going to fly off probably pretty soon. If you're not doing it right, it's not going to rattle rhythmically, or it's not going to rattle at all. So again, this is so that's a really fun way, and for some students that can be really, really effective. So these are the main steps that I take with students in developing vibrato, and I keep coming back to them and working with them. The main challenge is usually tension wants to creep in there, but just keep coming back to those really big, large motions and feeling really, really relaxed. All right, so we're going to talk just a little further about fine-tuning the vibrato once you have those initial stages. So we first talked about starting with that second finger. Once that's really comfortable, you can then try to create that same feeling on all the other fingers. And again, the most important thing is how it feels in the arm and the hand. So that's what you're trying to create. You're not really at this point trying to create your ideal vibrato sound that might start to make you go too fast and be too tense. So at this point, once you're comfortable with all the fingers, then you could start adding vibrato on long pieces in your orchestra music or in your solo music, and that's a good way to start getting comfortable with it. So once that's working really well for you, we also like to develop in string playing something what we call a continuous vibrato. Since about the early 20th century, this has sort of become our concept of good string sound, is that we generally play with vibrato, especially for romantic and any literature from the 20th century on. We play with vibrato on most every note. For classical and Baroque, we use it a little more sparingly and more for special effects. So with students, I often work with them on this, and one thing we talk about is walking the hand. So we're going to practice walking, and we all know how to walk, and then we're going to take that same motion to our fingers. So you could stand up. When you take a step, you're going to shift your weight to one foot, right? And then you're going to take a little step, you're going to place your foot a little above the other, and then in a split second, you're going to shift the weight to the new foot. And for cello playing and bass playing, the shifting of the weight is what's important when we want to start developing continuous vibrato. If we don't shift the weight between feet, then we can't walk, okay? So you could have a seat. So this is something I call walking the hand. And when we do this, I'm going to do it without vibrato first and sort of talk you through the process. So just in first position, I'm going to play first finger, weight is fully on one. I'm going going to go to third finger, and in this, these fingers are going to stay down, 1 and 2, but they're not going to press. But the weight goes to 3. When we go to 4, I like to support my fourth finger with my third, but 1 and 2 stay down, and they're not pressing. When we go back, we're going to shift the weight to 3. When we go to 1, we're going to shift the weight to 1. So again, just shifting the weight to each new finger that we go to. So the hand shape in slow technique is actually a little different between 1 and 4. With the weight fully on 4, on 1 we tend to elongate the finger just a little bit. So this can really help when we want to add vibrato throughout a piece. So again, the same idea, we're going to vibrato on 1. Now I'm going to go to 2. If we keep pressing down with 1, that's going to sort of inhibit the vibrato motion. So it can either float or it can stay on the string but not press down. When I go to 3, these two fingers, again, they're going to sort of center around the third finger. They're not going to press down. Then we go to the fourth finger. I like to support with my third finger. These fingers are not going to press down, 1 and 2. So you can try that with me. Okay, so we're going to start D string first position, and we're going to start first finger on E, and go ahead and use the vibrato there. Now we're going to go to second finger F natural, and the first finger you could lift it a little bit, but it should not be pressing down. Now we're going to go to F sharp, so third finger for cellos, fourth finger for basses. And again, these fingers, they should not be pressing down, thumb should not be pressing up. And then we're going to go to fourth finger. So the hand shape is actually different for each finger. So watch this, first finger. So I find the idea of walking the hand and shifting the weight to each new finger really helps students build that sort of continuous vibrato between notes. So some final tips as you're refining your vibrato. One thing that sort of helps energize the vibrato at the beginning of a note is to think of the preparatory motion of the vibrato. So the preparatory motion is going to be a downward swing of your hand. And that initial downward swing is just going to swing the whole hand into balance and start you vibrating. So if you start with just sort of a slow motion, it's not going to have a lot of energy to it. But if you start with just a downward swing of the hand, so you're just going to swing down, and that just swings the whole arm into the vibrato position. That can add a lot of energy to vibrato right at the beginnings of notes. So that's something I found that's been helpful for students. Another thing that for my personal playing, when I was learning vibrato, I experimented with the angle of my fingers. So generally, when we play fast technique, our fingers are pretty straight across the string. And for some people, the vibrato at that angle works just fine. But I found with my hand, it actually helps to angle my hand just a little bit. So the palm of my hand starts to face the cello rather than my shoulder. So it's angling just a little bit this way. So this is the difference in how it sounds. If my finger is straight across the string, it sounds like this. If I angle it, I can get different tone colors, and for me it's more relaxed. So I've also found for some students, angling the hand ever so slightly can really help them get a better sort of relaxed kind of vibrato. And for some students, it doesn't impact their vibrato much either way. Um, Now, for cello, the other thing that I found really helpful, I think first fingers tend to actually be a fairly hard finger to vibrato on. Second and third are usually comfortable. And then the first finger, unless we sort of alter our hand shape, we often don't get the same kind of vibrato that we do on our second, third, and fourth fingers. So one thing that one of my cello teachers really helped me work on is that when we go from, say, second finger to first, if I don't make any adjustments, it's going to sound like that. So with this knuckle, um, the first base knuckle of our first finger, if we pop that knuckle out and elongate the first finger, we're going to get more variations of vibrato that we can use. So again, this is without any change in the hand shape. Now, if I pop that knuckle out over here and elongate the first finger, I get a much nicer vibrato then. Now I'm going to elongate it. So often coming from 4 to 1, you have to really pop that knuckle out. So that first finger, you could think of bringing this knuckle out, elongating the finger, and also angling the finger just a little bit. That often helps, especially for cellists. So I think I'm going to stop there for today. I hope some of these ideas will help you in developing your own vibrato or help your students. I think one of the best resources for vibrato is Playing the String Game by Phyllis Young. The last several chapters of that book are dedicated solely to vibrato. So good luck on your vibrato with journey, and I hope you've found this helpful for today.